Hi, and welcome to Fantastic Friday. Today we're talking about the Fantastic Four, number 15, featuring the Mad Thinker and his awesome android. I'm Tom Scioli, author of Godzilla's Monsterpiece Theater, a new comic book series which will be in stores in 2 weeks. I also want to remind you that October is Jacktober, a month-long celebration of Jack Kirby in the form of a series of drawing prompts, one for each day of the month. On the surface, this is one of the duller issues of the Fantastic Four. It doesn't have a lot of the pizzazz that some of the previous issues do, but it's actually conceptually very interesting and I'd say is a piece of genuine science fiction. It's got some really great, interesting ideas. A lot of these ideas have sort of flowered in the world that we live in now. You can imagine how they came up with the idea of the Mad Thinker. You look at Rodin's Thinker, and there you have it. You imagine the thinker becoming a sculptor in his own right and creating the android, neither animal nor vegetable nor mineral. What is it? So the story starts with the Baxter Building. We get a bit of a reenactment of the first issue of the Fantastic Four, Mr. Fantastic shooting the Fantastic flare gun into the air. Johnny's on a date. Things are going great, but then he sees the signal, "Great balls of fire," at a time like this. Jerry Lee Lewis and goodness gracious, Great Balls of Fire was, kind of an older reference at this point, I think, to Jack Kirby and Stan Lee. That's like young people stuff, the rock and roll of the 50s, even though we're into the 60s. Johnny flames out of his car. Sue Storm is getting her hair done with one of those hairdryer machines. I don't know if those still exist. I know when I was a kid, going with my mom to the beauty parlor and just seeing, rows of those with, old ladies, sort of sitting with their heads in there. It's a very sort of 20th century image. I do wonder if that still exists. She runs out from her appointment when we see the Thing. His war with the Yancey Street gang has escalated. Things cool off when he gets the Fantastic Four signal. They all meet back at the Baxter Building, and Reed is up to some really interesting stuff. He has created a new form of life, a one-celled organism which lived for a few seconds. That's pretty amazing stuff to be doing in the 60s. One of the true science fiction elements of this story. Kind of cool. And so when it changes gear into sort of like gangster stuff, you do realize where this series could go as it little by little frees itself of the bonds of the superhero genre. So the Mad Thinker brings everybody together. And the Mad Thinker, it's a really interesting concept. He has designed a supercomputer that can plan and calculate to an infinitesimal degree, and he's going to use that to conquer the world. Specifically, he's going to create a mafia government. He's going to proclaim New York an independent nation with himself as its ruler, and he'll have crime enforcement officers, recruited from organized crime. Obvious, parallels to fascism here. But the only thing standing in his way, according to his computers, is the Fantastic Four. And so his computer is going to help him eliminate the Fantastic Four from the equation. This supercomputer is sort of an embodiment of the butterfly effect. It can study and analyze at such an infinitesimal degree that it can predict all those like little tiny things that, lead to much larger things. The butterfly that lands on an animal's nose and causes it to rain in Utah or whatever. Really kind of a cool concept. So the various pieces start falling into place. Johnny's cousin asks him to help out his failing circus, an electronics company, because of the freak occurrence of the guy mopping the floors of the boardroom, leaving his copy of the Fantastic Four on the table, and the executives see it and realize, oh, who we really need to head up our electronics division is Mr. Fantastic. The Thing gets offers from a wrestling promoter, continuing the wrestling theme that we've seen running through some of the previous issues. Sue Storm gets an offer to become a movie star, which she kind of already is from the movie that the Submariner made. And so they all come home and they're all thinking about these decisions they have to make, and none of them want to tell the others. And Reed comes home, and so everybody shares their news. And so three of them are going into show business, and Reed is going into the private sector. He's leaving his nonprofit to go work at a big electronics company and, no doubt lay some of the groundwork for the modern computer industry that we have now. And then another freak occurrence that the thinker has anticipated, which he's going to use as the signal to start his plan, is a meteor crashing in New York's Lower Bay. It causes an earthquake. Nobody's hurt. But now he knows, because he sent the Fantastic Four on their way, he knows that their Baxter Building home base is left unprotected. And so now he can go in with his gangster army and take all of Reed's inventions, all his ideas. And he reads about Reed's experiment, which produced a one-celled organism, new life, Reed Richards as God. And he's going to build on that. And again, the Mad Thinker, just like Dr. Doom, he's sort of a good dark mirror of Reed Richards, this guy who just has this tremendous intellect, and that's his superpower. Reed's lucky enough to have two superpowers. So Johnny's at the circus, and it's kind of sweet. He has these pictures of his friends and family hanging up in his dressing room at the circus. There's something poignant about that. And then Sue is starring in a new science fiction movie, and Johnny's finding his new life a little bit empty compared to his life as a superhero. And same thing with Sue. She used to be doing this stuff for real, going to different planets and fighting alien monsters. And now she's doing a fake version of it with cheesy special effects. And Reed is finding that I tend to think of Reed Richards as kind of a little bit stiff, a little bit straight-laced and boring, but he's actually too eccentric and freewheeling to really fit in corporate America. He's bristling. It's kind of an age-old story where, he creates this amazing thing on his own, and then, when he goes to work for a boss, even though the pay is much higher than what he was getting with the nonprofit organization of the Fantastic Four, he's finding that he does not want to work under these restrictions. I realize now that I'm just not cut out to work for anyone else. I've got to do things my own way without interference. And the Thing is going through with his wrestling career and fighting a Ulick or Kalibak lookalike. But the guy starts making comments about the Thing's girlfriend, an age-old wrestling trope. And you see it with Mr. T talking to Adrian in Rocky 3. And so the Thing spins this wrestler around. This panel where he's spinning the wrestler around kind of, I don't know, it feels like R. Crumb or sort of underground comics, maybe because of this sort of bearded proto-hippie character here and the humorous cartooning style. Do not open until Christmas. And so the Mad Thinker has turned the Baxter Building into a gigantic crystal, and they need to find a way in. The Mad Thinker's face appears almost like the Wizard of Oz, taunting them. Johnny creates a blue flame fireball, which is kind of cool. I don't think I've seen blue flame from Johnny yet in the series, but it's a natural way of showing that, he's amping up the power of his flame. And then once they sort of break through, the Intergang, a proto version of Intergang, this sort of high-tech mafia, start firing on the Fantastic Four with weapons that Reed himself designed. Then they have to climb up the elevator shaft, which is always cool in these stories. They're getting attacked with a nerve gas, and the Thing twists Reed up and then sets him spin to sort of blow the fumes away. And I feel like this composition, we see it later with the Punisher in the Galactus story, and then we also see it there's like another evil android story towards the end of Jack Kirby and Stan Lee's run on the Fantastic Four, that this sort of multiple arm motion sequence is used. Then we get the introduction of the Mad Thinker's android. He has created a new form of life based on Reed's research, which they're referring to as a living android. But it does look like some proto form of life, some humanoid thing that evolved out of a one-celled organism, and just a great 3-panel sequence as he stalks down the hallway. I used it in Fantastic Four Grand Design. And we get a really fun fight. It's a very strange looking creature, and it takes on the form of of Ben's power, which is kind of cool, but they defeat it by the Invisible Girl basically pressing the off switch, like a nerve terminal on the creature's right side. But the Mad Thinker has predicted all of this. There are no surprises here. But all of a sudden, his weapons that he's stolen from Reed Richards cease to function. And Reed explains to him, you overlooked one thing in your plans, Thinker. There's always an X factor to prepare for, the unexpected. I like the use of X factor this early in the history of Marvel Comics, which would later become the title of a Marvel comic. And that X factor was Willie Lumpkin. That, how could you ever predict? You might be able to predict all kinds of things, but how are you ever going to predict the movements of lovable old Willie Lumpkin, who pressed a button that Reed had designed as a fail-safe device to short circuit his devices on the off chance that some villain had taken control of them. So I'm not sure exactly the ins and outs of how that thing works, but I like the general idea. And the Mad Thinker gets carted off to prison. For this, I gave up a career in showbiz. I ought to have my head examined. Then we get a nice Fantastic Four pinup. I'm Tom Scioli, author of Godzilla's Monsterpiece Theater, a new comic book series which will be in stores in 2 weeks. I also want to remind you about Jacktober, a series of drawing prompts, one for each day of the month of October. I'll see you next time for Fantastic Friday.